Welcome to The Happy Writer, a show about creating and sustaining a long-term author career. My name is Patty Jansen, writer of science fiction and fantasy. I've published independently since 2011. This show covers motivation, diversification, learning new skills, and your place in your career. Come on in and be happy. In The Happy Writer, episode 42, I'm going to talk about a few things that you probably don't need to worry about yet when you're just starting out, and that are more suitable for the advanced author career. In the last episode, I outlined a few things that are always going to be important for you and that you should never lose sight of. But there are so many things that we can do, and there is only so much time to do them. You need to decide how to most effectively spend your time. Certain things are definitely only going to be worth the time spent on them once you've been writing for a while, once you have a feeling for who your audience is and where they are and how you can reach them, and most importantly, once you have a couple of books out and you have ironed out the kinks in your publishing and writing process. When people used to write to be traditionally published, writers' groups and communities would continuously hammer on about how important it was to have patience. Compared to those heady days, and to be sure I wouldn't advocate going back to them at all, but compared to those days and those writers, the current crop of self-published authors are an extremely impatient bunch, probably to the detriment of themselves. They want everything now, and they want it to be successful now. And the truth is, although there are always the annoying exceptions to every rule, that most writers and most tactics won't deliver success until you've done them for a while, and you have become familiar with how they work. So the most important thing is to start developing some patience and recognize that most things will need longer lead times and persistence to bear fruit. With that in mind, let's discuss a few things that are definitely not something you need to worry about right in the beginning. The first one is to have an elaborate website. In the episode about author websites, I outlined a few things about setting up an author website, but the undercurrent to all of this is that you only need to spend as much time as warranted on the website, especially in the beginning. If you don't yet know what to put on your website, it is perfectly okay to just put up something temporary with just a photo and a couple of your books. I would still buy the domain, if you like, before someone else grabs it. I might even have a self-hosted website. This doesn't need to take a lot of effort, but I would definitely just put up a simple WordPress blog site with a list of your books. You don't need to pay anyone to do this. It's literally just for a basic blog, and you can either redirect the domain or you can simply keep it for later. One of the advantages of using the free WordPress blog is that its search engine optimization is very good, and people searching for your name will be directed to it anyway. Worry about getting a more elaborate website and things like selling from your website later. The same applies for search engine optimization of your blog and all that kind of stuff. Don't waste too much time on it. The second point I wouldn't worry too much about at this stage is attempting to get a positive return on investment for advertising. Some people even say don't do any ads at all, but I think that would be wasting your valuable opportunity. If you want to start figuring out what works for your books in terms of advertising, you will need to learn, and you might as well start learning while you can still clearly determine that if you got a sale or two, they definitely came from the ad you ran because you have no audience otherwise. I wouldn't worry too much about spending time on the calculation of return on investment. I definitely wouldn't worry too much about doing this for the pay-per-click advertising platforms. I would advocate that you play around with them a little bit just to see how they work, so that when you are ready and have more books to advertise in a particular series, that potentially could make you a positive return on investment, You don't have to go through this whole learning period. Also, there is always the off chance that something does take off, and you want to keep your toe in the water just in case. But don't spend too much time on this kind of stuff. It's an incredibly interesting rabbit hole, and it's easy to start spending a lot of time on running ads that would be so much better spent writing, especially when you just put up book 1 of a series, but you have books 2 and 3 still to be written. Just write the books first, okay? So don't worry about whether or not this advertising is profitable. More likely than not, it won't be. You only have 1 book out. Remember that for most authors, the profit comes in sales of other volumes in the series at full price. It's next to impossible to return a positive profit from just 1 book that you sell for $2.99, let alone for 99 cents. Advertising a cheap book can be a strategy if you have a mailing list sign up in the back and you hope people read through the book and really like it, and sign up through your mailing list. But to be honest, there are probably better methods of doing this, and pay-per-click advertising is very expensive compared to, say, running an ad with one of the established ad lists, such as Bargain Booksy or Free Booksy if your book is free, or other sites like Fussy Librarian or e-reader News Today. There is a whole bunch of these small platforms where it is not always hard to get your book featured, and they are much less expensive than pay-per-click ads. You can, of course, also apply for BookBub, but again, it's expensive and it's not going to break the bank if you don't have any further books to sell. So, I advocate that you do some advertising, but that you consider this your learning phase. Spend accordingly at a level you can afford, and don't sweat the ROI. Another thing that you probably shouldn't need to worry about right now is audiobooks. They're very expensive, and not only that, they are kind of permanent. Once you have produced the audiobook, it is very hard to get it taken down, and not all platforms will allow you to make corrections. So it's best to do this when you have settled on your writing style, and you're sure that your book doesn't contain any mistakes that need to be fixed later. You're sure you don't want to add or cut stuff later. Especially ACX will consider the audiobook permanent, and if you engaged a narrator to do your book through the ACX portal, you can't just take it down. And in case you didn't use ACX, it's still hard to get all the improvements filtered through, even if you upload all your files independently. So make sure that once you do start recording audio, you're absolutely certain that you're not going to want to change the book. Also, because audio is so expensive, I wouldn't do it unless the cost of producing the book is paid for out of the sales of your catalogue. If you have only 1 book, and it's the first in the series, and you have no idea how well it's selling yet, or it's probably not selling that much, then you're much better off waiting. Audio is an advanced strategy, and finding narrators and navigating this whole landscape is fraught with hidden traps. You have to remember that by engaging a narrator, you're part of another person's career, and you have to make sure that if you give them the work, you want to give them something good. Of course, an option is to narrate your own. You can always do that. Still, even if you do want to narrate your own, I would wait until I had at least a whole series out. One of the things you sometimes see is that authors write a couple of books in a series that are of very different lengths, and then they only realize later on that maybe book 1 is really a novella and should have been much longer, and they want to expand the book to make it more in line with the other volumes. Or they want to redistribute the story across a number of volumes so that they are of similar length. Wait until this sort of stuff has settled, including any errors and writing style changes that you may want to make. Once the book is in audio, it's out there, and some venues won't take it down, ever. The above also applies to translations, with the added caution that it's pretty much impossible to advertise without speaking the language, and that you may need to hire someone to do this. It's also impossible to check the quality of translations unless you can read the language, And if you think audio is expensive, think again. People also don't appreciate, like at all, how tiny a lot of the non-English markets are, and also that they each have their own culture of books that sell well. If audio is advanced, translations are super advanced. Okay, there is BabbleCube and sites like that, but again, how do you take quality and how do you advertise and what does their contract say about tying up your books to the platform? Another thing that is probably for later is to hire people to help you with administrative tasks. Make no mistakes, I do think it's important that you hire someone to make your covers and for your editing, but those are the production costs, and I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people you want to hire as virtual assistants to help you with planning promotions and do other administrative tasks such as sending out newsletters and managing contracts with other authors. Sometimes I feel like people have this idea that if you can say my virtual assistant, they feel successful, because obviously you sell enough to pay for that virtual assistant. Do make sure that you do actually sell enough before hiring someone like that, and then also make sure that whatever this person does actually adds value. In another episode about hiring someone to do your ads, I already said that you probably need to know the ins and outs of what you're hiring this person to do. You can't just treat it as a black box and hand it off to them, expecting them to do a marvelous job. They may, or they may not. After all, no one is going to care as much about your books as you are, and they may be in it because they like helping authors, and that may even be true. But their sense of satisfaction is going to be highly determined by the money you give them. So when the currency becomes money, make sure you're trading a little bit of money to make more money, and don't trade money for an inflated ego. Most writers, including myself, function without a virtual assistant whatsoever. I'm not saying that a virtual assistant won't be beneficial, but it may. About needing one, you don't. So there you go, those are a few things that you probably don't need to worry about so much when you are just beginning. They may become more important for you later, but the tired metaphor is that it's a marathon and not a sprint, and while I don't fully agree with this tired saying, there is definitely some truth in it. You have to keep learning and keep adding new skills. You do that by focusing on the most important things, getting them down, and then moving to the next skill set. I am really glad that we are no longer beholden to the traditional publishers who, by the grace of the great teapot in the sky, would look at your work if they felt so inclined and were not too busy, and sat for 6 months on your manuscript before giving you a one-line rejection letter. I agree, that is just outright rude, and I am eternally grateful that we don't have to go through that crap anymore. But a little bit of caution and patience and persistence goes a long way in your self-publishing career. Recognize that there are things that can wait. So there you go. Those were a few things that I think are advanced strategies and you don't need to worry about so much when you're a beginning writer. In the next episode, I will mention a few things that you probably don't need to worry about, ever. Thank you for listening to the Happy Writer Show. Check out links and information about other episodes on my website at pattyjansen.com, where you can also find out about my books. You can support me by subscribing to the show or on Patreon at patreon.com/pattyjansen.